is selective controlled disobedience. So I don't know if any of you saw the Blockupy protests the other day. I listened to all the Linkspartei parliamentary speeches around it, and it's chaos. It becomes a circus in Parliament when they talk about this. A lot of them spoke there. And in a way, I enjoy that circus. It falls under the category of selective controlled disobedience, by which they're trying to hegemonize, in other words, bring together a bloc capable of resistance. But it also has to be not just resistance, but they believe it also has to be a united front strategy, which actually formulates a class politics. Let me leave it at that, because that would take us into another area. But we see on the ground that formulation of a class politics has to take on concrete forms with respect to debt, labor, taxation. And it's a very gray area. So that's the tough problem. How do you unify an economic politics of freedom with a popular politics of hegemony, or creating ruling blocs? Yeah, so I think that's where the left is at, and I think Syriza then is a huge shot in the arm, but the dangers and the risks are extremely high.
All right. With that, we're going to transition to Edward Elias. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese and an expert in contemporary Catalan and Spanish culture, theories of architecture, post-Marxism and deconstruction, and postmodernism and globalization. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So I'll basically touch on mostly the same things. One of the things that I think it's becoming evident is that we were talking about Greece, but we no longer talk about just one context without implying all the global context. So I'll talk about maybe the equivalent of Syriza in Spain, which is called Podemos. There is a party that is also similar, but in different ways. But maybe what I plan to do is to see how, along the lines of what Ben was saying, that how the classic binaries that define the left no longer correspond to the type of discourse and militancy that the party like Podemos and I think Syriza display. So I'll look at four of these binaries. So first, we hear that Podemos or Syriza are parties of the left or even of the radical left, but in the case of Podemos, they explicitly say that they do not believe in the categories of the left and the right. Their names for political antagonism are the caste versus us. And us can be transcoded as the people, the non-privileged, those who are below, the majority, the indignados movement, or even the youth, so the new generations. So obviously in the US, this connects with the new binary of the 1% versus the 99%, which is not necessarily one of the right versus the left. And the other connection between Podemos and the US is clearly the name. Podemos clearly comes from the Yes We Can, Obama's Yes We Can. So interestingly, too, Podemos does not necessarily represent the rich versus the poor, because more than 50% of its voters are actually from the middle and even upper classes. So the second question is the question of patriotism. The classic left was internationalist, was non-nationalist, was the workers of the world unite. So in the case of Podemos, and I think Syriza too, they embraced their nation as the space of their struggle. So in fact, their goal is to recover some sense of national dignity and sovereignty vis-à-vis the transnational policies of the European Union. So Podemos present themselves as a movement of locational and national democracy, and not so much as a local expression of a universal fight. At the same time, it is interesting to observe that they avoid the word nation, and they use the word patria. And this empty signifier may not have the immediate connotations of nationalism, but we could say that it also fulfills the same ideological function of sheltering the people and making it a recognizable political subject. This connects with populism, what Ben was talking about. So for the classic left, this non-universalization is not desirable. For instance, with reference to the massive demonstrations in Greece and in Turkey's Taksim Square in 2013, so right before Syriza, Slavoj Žižek wrote, I quote, "The true path would be to coordinate the two struggles, the Greek one and the Turkish one, to reject patriotic temptations to leave behind the two countries' historical enmity and to seek grounds for solidarity. End quote. But I think that Syriza is not invested in building solidarity with Turkish militants, and in the same way Podemos has expressed solidarity with Syriza or even with Venezuela's Chavismo, but it is clearly focused only on the reformation or the reform of Spain. So this brings us to the third issue, namely, what is their fundamental goal? It seems that their most immediate goal is, like Syriza, to counter the austerity measures of the EU with various subsequent aims, to boost the Spanish economy, to redistribute wealth that is now in the hands of financial oligarchs, and to renegotiate the debt payments and link them to real growth. This may be connected with two phenomena from the 20th century, the Keynesian politics of the welfare state and the anti-colonial struggles, so as they express the refusal to be a debtor colony of Northern Europe, very much like Greece. So in this respect, their goal is not revolutionary, but it may not be simply reformist either. That is, the classic dichotomy between reform and revolution does not fully capture the meaning of their agenda. In other words, they do not question the fundamental rules of capitalism, as Sven was saying, but they do not simply obey the existing rules either. So this can also be said in temporal terms. Their project is conceived not as a step in a proletarian road to socialism, but rather as an intervention in the present conjuncture, without caring too much if this intervention will have reformist or revolutionary consequences in the future. So finally, in close relation to these previous points, in Podemos there's a continuity with and respect for the current configuration of the Spanish state. In Spain today, two main projects are questioning the status quo. One is Podemos, and the other is Catalan separatism, which is my own struggle. While the latter, Catalan separatism, naturally aims to shake the current structure of sovereign power because it wants to secede from Spain, Podemos does not. Podemos speaks of a new constituent process, but this constituent process does not involve changing the territorial distribution of power. Their Spanish patriotism precludes the questioning of the territorial integrity of the state. Symptomatically, their appeal to the people or to the patria does not include the word republic, because republicanism would call into question the current parliamentary monarchy installed by dictator Francisco Franco before he died in 1975. So in sum, the generational antagonism, the patriotic content, the ambiguity of their long-term goals, and the preservation of the parliamentary monarchy and the state structure define the new left in Spain, and at the same time seem to disintegrate the very concept of the left as we have inherited from modernity.
All right. I'm going to talk for 5 minutes, put my 2 cents in, and then we're going to open the floor to questions.
And at that point, it'll be 12 minutes left.
Okay. Sorry, we're all long-winded academics. My approach has been to this question has been a little more pragmatic, and I'm going to wind up coming off as a Debbie Downer because I see a lot of impediments for Syriza to successfully execute its goals. I think the goal of easing austerity is a worthy one. It's one that all sides of Europe actually need. But I think there are a number of things that are going to be making it extremely difficult to happen. The first of those is brinksmanship. There is no real option for Greece other than staying in the euro. And I think this is also true for Europe vis-a-vis Greece. There is no other real option for Europe than Greece staying in the euro. Yet the challenge of renegotiating austerity provisions, in order to do that, Greece has to credibly threaten to allow the Eurozone to implode, and the Eurozone has to credibly threaten to allow Greece to implode. What you have essentially here is mutually assured destruction. From nuclear to economic. There's a lot that can go wrong, and there are voices on both sides that underestimate the potential impact of Greece returning to the drachma. So I think anytime you have that level of brinksmanship, there's danger. The second thing I'd like to highlight that I think is an impediment potentially is inexperience. Syriza is a new political party. It's a new party to governance, and it has little experience in actually governing. They're neophytes. In the US, it takes the Republican or Democratic Party with party apparatuses behind them and preparation behind them 9 months or a year to get up and running effectively. This is going to happen with a party with a prime minister who's never been a prime minister, doesn't come from a political family, and a party where you don't have people who have ministerial experience. There are going to be a lot of problems, and there already are a lot of problems showing. Growing pains are showing, from Yanis Varoufakis' photo shoot in Paris Match and his inability to control his image, to a supposedly the wrong letter getting sent to the German government promising that described Greece's plans for complying with the demands of its creditors. Growing pains are showing, and they're going to happen. I mean, this is a new government. Third point of skepticism, changing the EU is not a simple process. The Maastricht and Lisbon treaties enshrine the principles of what, this is my terminology, ordo neoliberalism in the structure of the monetary union. Essentially, in other words, the monetary union is founded on neoliberal principles which are masquerading as technocratic governance. There's room for some fudging at the margins, and hopefully that will happen. There will be some agreement. But true change involves new treaties and agreement by all Eurozone members, and that's not an easy task, particularly when the majority of governments in the Eurozone at present are center-right. It means they have to admit they were wrong, and that's not good for electoral politics. The fourth challenge I see, and I raise this with some trepidation, is racism. This is not a topic people have wanted to broach. I think it needs to be discussed. One looks at the brouhaha surrounding Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis' luxury apartment in Athens, which was the subject of the photo shoot in Paris Match. And it's gone beyond poking fun at the supposed asymmetry of a wealthy socialist. What is the message here? No Greeks are supposed to be wealthy? All Greeks are supposed to suffer? And I find this, I hear this from tourists over and over in Greece in the summer. They're shocked to find wealthy Greeks in spite of the crisis. What is the assumption there? I mean, and if you're assuming all Greeks should suffer, all Greeks should be less at a lower economic level than you, sorry, that's a racist assumption. We saw it also in the demonizing of the supposed lazy Greek. Never mind that Eurostat's own, the European Union Statistical Service, said that Greeks worked in 2008 2,100 hours per annum versus 1,500 for France and 1,400 for Germany. More recently, Bild, the German tabloid/newspaper, has been raging against the greedy Greeks. And again, never mind that the vast majority of funds have gone to bail out banks, including German banks, and to satisfy bondholders, and that the vast majority of Greeks have suffered precipitous declines in their standard of living. And when I say vast majority, I think we're talking 99%. It's the only people who have survived intact or flourished are the 1%. So anyway, this is a question, and yet racism can't be touched as a topic, and there is moral outrage when, and this was over the top, there was a recent cartoon depicting the German finance minister Wolfgang Schäuble as a Nazi, and under a heading that said, "Let the negotiations begin." He is depicted as saying, "We insist on the soap from your fat, and we'll talk about the fertilizer from your ashes." It was over the top, and it was immediately denounced by Syriza, in spite of the fact that it came from one of their newspapers. But the political attitudes are hardening. Ethnic stereotypes are rampant, probably on both sides. And I think these are major impediments to a negotiated solution. So with that, we'll open things to questions. And sorry we talked so long. Got about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
you've
sir.
all touched on this a little bit in that Germany, or Greece has a left party right now, but it's going against stark opposition in other countries that are more center-right. And so is it possible, even if Greece gets its new government rolling and they get past their growing pains and things start working out, is it possible for a leftist government to flourish or even succeed if all the other countries in the Eurozone are more right, or would it take international movement of leftist parties, or at least popular support, in order to help the one Iceland?
To me, the question?
Yeah.
I think it's to the panel as a whole.
Yeah,
Olga, why don't you
yeah.
start
All
out?
of you touched on this in some.
Would it maybe make sense to, since we don't have so much time, to collect a few questions and then let the whole panel respond to whichever of the questions they find particularly?
Sure.
So, Dan, anything?
I have so many questions, this is great, thank you. One I'm curious about is what you think of the long-term prospects for a party like Syriza. So it seems to me that one can operate as a protest party, but not dominate as one. And I would say this also for parties in the far right, which we also see. We could have a similar panel of parties in the far right. And so is it the case that Syriza can possibly win the election? Or by nature of the fact that they have run from a very extreme position and are now forced to moderate, does this basically spell their doom? And I would say the same thing for Podemos if they could get into power, various radical parties. I'm also curious about this notion that there can be no Brexit. So that was the case in 2010 when European banks were so exposed. But it's interesting because Olga, you said that when you talk to Greeks, they say we need to be out from underneath the yoke of the European Union, and fundamentally the way to do that is to have a Brexit. To go back to the drachma will bring tremendous amounts of short-term pain, but Greece would have control over its monetary policy again, and could actually maybe, we could see a way out of this. And so I'm wondering if Brexit, though very radical, is really so impossible.
Yes, Hannes.
A whole number of remarks. The first one is concerning the astonishment in Greece. I think what lies behind it, I'm not sure it's only racism. The real argument that's interesting, I think, in relation to the political theory is that private property per capita in Greece is higher than in Germany. So what that means is that Germany, in a way, is the most socialist country in the Euro. It has working, well-financed social programs, very high taxation, relatively good redistribution of wealth. So paradoxically, Germany is this entity that controls capital markets, but and becomes increasingly powerful while at the same time being the most socialist country. And I think that's in a way the core of this, and now, so it's not so much, I think, for me at least, as far as I can remember, it's not so much the racism argument than this interesting political confusion actually that's so puzzling about it. So it's actually really the private. So it seems to me that in all of your talks, what I found really interesting is that Syriza seems to upset, or these movements seem to upset all political categories that we use in order to determine, to understand the situation. And I think an aspect of it that I find interesting is the enormous attraction that they have to not only left-wing movements, but also the public attraction. So they're kind of sexy, and I think no matter what they think and how intelligent it is, I think people think all of a sudden, well, look, it's maybe possible to think in a different way, even if these guys don't articulate it in a coherent way, and part of it is the problem of the quasi-monopoly of American rating agencies, right? They have 80-something% of the market share, and even through the milieu from which their workers come, I think they're highly ideological institutions, right? There are several. Italy, for example, is filing a legal complaint against Standard & Poor's that's likely to be successful in parts because they really make mistakes. They don't have a factual basis that's adequate to rating whole countries. you know, there are huge asymmetries in the perception. The United States has a higher deficit measured against its productivity than the whole Eurozone, for example. But there is no question of downgrading, whereas they downgrade specific countries like Portugal that had no debt problem. I mean, Ireland, Spain, and Greece are good examples because they have structural problems. They had them for a long time. Portugal had none. It's just a weak economy with low growth rates, but it doesn't have a galloping debt, nothing. So only the downgrading forced it through by making the interest rates go above 6% to, in a way, give over political sovereignty to the World Bank and the European Union. So I think what's going on is very complicated. It involves new actors. You know, these rating agencies are highly political. And I think our categories of defining the political are profoundly shaken up. And that's why I personally love those guys, precisely because they say, hey, who tells a Schäuble that he has an adequate understanding of the economic situation? I mean, I thought a limited exit of the Greeks in the beginning, not now, a limited exit for 3 years, say, you're no longer part of the European Union, you can reintroduce the drachma, you declare bankruptcy,
Have
you
certain
can go through a
currency
process,
controls.
would have been the best thing to do 5 years ago.
Either that
So
or a more general bailout loan forgiveness,
Yeah.
which technically could still be an option, but
Yeah.
politically it's not. So anyway, we will know that the left has won when businessmen stop wearing ties.
You have one prime minister stuff there.
So this was more a rambling than a question, but a couple of points
Right.
anyway. So
Very good
for me,
observation.
Does anybody else want to get in here before we hit the panel on the final word?
Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Yeah.
Well, I want to address your question first, Diana, about the long-term process of Syriza. I cannot speak of Podemos. These are two, and I really like what Edgar put together as a framework for me to understand Podemos a little bit better. And I think I can understand now what this new nationalism means for Greeks as well, for the Greek Syriza party. I want to be, I don't want to be pessimistic, but with the long history of Greek politics, for Syriza to win a second time, it will be impossible. From 1823 up to now, we had over 176 governments. This is not a good track record for Greece. I mean, there was a period of time where one government was a month after another, succeeding another. This is what parliamentary democracy is. This is what the history of Greece has been up to 1974. In fact, it is post-1974 that we can actually have a more or less functional electoral policy, which allows parties to fulfill their term of maybe 4 years. And PASOK was pretty much the only one after the New Democracy Party, post-1974, again, who fulfilled that promise. So I want to be optimistic that the seeds of dissension, the seeds of, movement towards a fairer Greece will continue, and I think they will continue, but differently, because the society has been incentivized. The society is operating with strong NGOs, with strong movements from the people, and I'm not talking about protests. I'm talking about a new reimagining of what a citizen can do, which is very different from what the citizenry has been before the austerity measures came, and even before that, when the financial markets collapsed. So I want to put that in relative terms, relative to how each society is organized. Because if we see it as only electoral politics, we are not going to be able to discern the differences between all these societies. And again, disciplinary bias on my part. I want to see the society as well, as a whole. And in that respect, the idea of a Grexit is very popular among a lot of Greeks, and among the Greeks that actually voted for Syriza. Because, as they say, if we have 5 years of hardship, we'll know there are 5 years of hardship, and we'll get over it. But this going back and forth, this strategy game that the left is playing, because it is a strategy game, as very well you described, on attacking neoliberalism, but holding back from neoliberalism because we are neoliberal ourselves, as Varoufakis, photo shoot indicated. It's a little bit disconcerting for a lot of Greeks.
If I can
So I'm
elaborate
gonna
on
stop it there.
a couple of Olga's points. The period of mass political fluctuation corresponded with a period of economic
Yes.
instability as well. So we may see a return to that. I'm not optimistic about the coalition, present coalition hanging together very well, and I think Syriza's performance to date is not going to be enough to keep them in office.
Bringing in the ideologies is quite important. The ideology of both the EU as represented by Germany, and it's ideology that permeates understandings of private property and socialism, understandings of macroeconomic behavior, because what the EU is doing, and again, I'm pointing to Germany not because of Germany, but it is the primary economic mover of the EU, is their understanding of change is firmly based on austerity and microeconomics. It's not based on macroeconomics. So while all the other societies in Syriza and Podemos are looking at macroeconomics, how can we go to the socialist ideal of an even society, a classless society, which Greece has been for quite a while, in relative terms more so than other societies. I think it's
Ben
an
and-
word to deal
Ben
with.
and-
I'm
Sorry. Yes.
I would love if we could keep this conversation going. I don't know if anybody has the room reserved at 1, we're already past 1. But Ben or Edgar, did you want to just put in 1 or 2 final words?
Yeah, one thing I want to point out, which I think is really important, so the Linkspartei in Germany gets around they got up to 12% just during the crisis, and they now currently have 9% of the vote, and they've gone, depending, in the old East, they get up to 25-30% of the vote, so they can be the largest party. But it might be outside of this conjuncture of Syriza as well, it goes back. Clearly, if you ask the conditions for Syriza's victory, it's an economic conjuncture, and what I mean by that, it's a crisis. And I would say certainly it's not clear that they can survive a re-election outside of this crisis. And then secondly, no left party today is a revolutionary party. That's the Katja Kipping-Lambert Rietzinga of the Linkspartei, they begin by saying that we're not a revolutionary party. So the goal isn't to totally transform capitalism, but I think there are two things, so going to the question about how long can they last in power. As governing forces, they can't, but there are very different platforms. There's the left platform, what's his name, within Syriza. There are all sorts of different
The
coalitions.
Iglesias party.
And they can have more or less radical positions. But I think they very much see themselves within 3 broad areas. They see themselves engaging in civil society. So they very many close alliances among civil society groups, both globally with the World Social Forums, with the Pink Tide in Latin America, and the anti-debt movements. They also see themselves very closely allied with what Yanis Varoufakis said is a concept of economic freedom. So targeting things like Moody's, questioning the role of the European Investment Bank and the Central European and the ECB, and really trying to change the terms of that. And then the third thing is the governing. But on that second one, the idea of economic freedom and the economic struggle, the success of it really is, it really does depend on a Marxist or a quasi-Marxist analysis. So you have people like Thomas Piketty who says, and Varoufakis and others very much affirm this and say, look, inequality is growing, and the retreat from social welfare policies, the retreat from even an ordoliberalism is leading to a spike in inequality. Now that's either right or wrong. So I don't think you can maintain a political coalition if the economic analysis isn't right. But definitely the question, I would say, looking at the success of the parties, it's not just whether they hold governance. It's those 3 areas, civil society, governance, and economics. And I think all those 3 areas have to be thought together strategically. And I think each of these parties with all their multiplicity within them. They're not Stalinist parties by any means. They're coalitions, they have caucuses, forums, platforms. So I think they're persistent forces, is what I would say, even if not governance forces.
A final word, Edgar?
No, I just want to say that the question, well, will these parties last in power? No, it doesn't matter. I mean, nobody